Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!'s Aaron Mate.
I want to go to Mike Elk in Washington, D.C. Mike, the background here, no inspections at this plant since 1991, but the company did report this chemical to regulators earlier this year. So what happened? How is it that there was no oversight leading up to this spill?
Well, we're seeing the same problems we saw in West Texas. You had half a dozen regulators with potential oversight of this plant, but as the Department of Environmental Protection's chief told Ken Ward of the Charleston Gazette, who, by the way, has been doing incredible, almost Pulitzer-quality reporting on this, as he told Ken Ward, this one just fell through the cracks. And that's what we heard after the West Texas disaster. It fell through the cracks. Basically, some regulators knew about a groundwater permit they had at this plant, but this plant, they didn't have a sense of how many chemicals. The Water Authority had no idea what was there. They had never communicated about it in the past. And this is a major problem because the Chemical Safety Board, which is a federal agency tasked with making recommendations on how to improve safety at chemical plants, 3 years ago in 2009, recommended that the Kanawha Valley, which is where this plant is located, better coordinate among different agencies how to respond to these kind of disasters. And there was no plan in place. The local emergency responders didn't know about the chemicals. The water plant didn't know about the chemicals. So there was no plan in place, and there was no communication between the different regulators about this. And this is the problem we see over and over again. There's a lack of money going into regulation, and of the regulators that do exist, they don't talk. And so things fall through the cracks, like the Department of Environmental Protection said yesterday.
Let's turn to a clip from a video produced by Elaine McMillan for the Charleston Daily Mail, talking about Freedom Industries, the company which owns the plant on the Elk River where the leak occurred, contaminating the water supply of the West Virginia's capital, Charleston, and beyond.
Founded in 1986, Freedom Industries produces chemicals for the mining, steel, and cement industries. The site of the leak is dedicated to storage, with 4 million gallons of space available. The site doesn't require a permit from the DEP since Freedom doesn't make products there. Officials confirm the facility was never inspected by the DEP before the leak. The DEP issued a cease operations order Friday, and federal authorities are investigating Freedom.
Mike Elk, take it from there and how you feel this fits into a larger pattern.
Yes. Well, yesterday, actually, the Department of Environmental Protection issued 2 complaints against Freedom Industries. One for the failure to report the leak as soon as it occurred. 2 for the failure to have any kind of prevention plan in place. They had a contamination wall there that could have prevented this water, these chemicals from going into the water. But the contamination wall was so full of holes and cracks that the head of the DEP in West Virginia said he would be concerned if that was the foundation of his house. That's how bad the quality of the concrete was. So already we've seen 2 charges filed against Freedom Industries. They had no plan in place, and I think there's going to be a big criminal investigation going on there. The person heading it up is the U.S. attorney called Boof Goodwin. And Boof Goodwin is the U.S. attorney who has gotten several former Massey Energy officials convicted on very creative charges about obstruction of justice and conspiracy. And Boof Goodwin has already announced that he's going to open a big criminal investigation. He's got people on the ground. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But unless there's serious jail time, unless there's serious consequences, I think this is just going to be another a tragedy that's forgotten about. Kate Shepard of the Huffington Post had a great article yesterday about interviews with different West Virginia Democrats, and a lot of West Virginia Democrats are kind of tepid about calling for new regulations in the wake of this, just like we saw in West Texas, where Obama spoke at the memorial of the workers that died in West Texas and didn't even mention the word lack of regulations. So obviously this is an uphill climb.
Mike, so what has happened since the West Texas explosion? 15 people killed. Was there any movement at all on regulation?
And explain when that happened.
Yes. The West Texas disaster happened last April. And what happened, it was a major explosion that killed 15 people. Similar situation. There weren't the proper safety measures in place at the plant. The plant didn't register with the proper authorities. Just a history of violations at this plant and lack of inspections. And so what happened is that there were about 6 or 7 different regulators going to the West Texas plant for different information, but they weren't communicating. So Obama formed a chemical safety task force to look at how you could change communications and regulations between agencies. That task force is meeting today in Washington, D.C. for an open comment hearing, and they're coming up with ways. But the work has been too slow. It's been nearly 10 months, and yet we're still repeating the same mistakes of West Texas. And in this case, 300,000 people were put at potential risk and could still very much be at risk from these chemicals. We don't know what these chemicals cause. We don't know the long-term effects. We don't know the effects that they might have on cancer 30 years from now.
Mike, how does the Obama administration compare with the Bush administration when it comes to environmental regulation?
Well, I think in some ways that, they've been tougher on coal, they've been tougher on these other things. But when it comes to the issue of workplace safety, they haven't been really proactive on it. I mean, it's like any other issue of workers' rights. This administration could really care less about saying anything about it in public. And we haven't seen the president address in a major way what is a big crisis. Now, the question is, will this change it? I think it's quite scary that 300,000 people couldn't get water. Could you imagine being in that town and having to be a reporter, a lot of the reporters that are there, and having no water and working night and day? I can't imagine that as a reporter. That's scary. That's terrifying. And maybe it'll lead to some change. But, like Robert Byrd said, following each workplace safety disaster, typically people cry, they get upset about it, and once the outrage is gone, nothing happens.
Erin Brockovich, you've gone to West Virginia from California with a team of people to investigate. Now the state is beginning to partially lift the ban on tap water 5 days after the chemical spill in the Elk River. How do people trust it? How do people believe that they should be able to drink their water? How do they know?
They don't. And I've said several times, it's a disaster of a very large magnitude, and turning a municipal system back on is not an easy process. It will be step by step, and there will be problems, and we may see the worst of this yet. We started to see some of that last night from people at the meeting. The color of the water, even after they're flushing, the color of the water, the smell of the water, people saying that they are experiencing, whether it be headaches or burning eyes or burning throats. And this is always a concern for people because we don't know what we're drinking. And they don't trust the fact that there's this 1 ppm set for this chemical, a chemical we really don't know a whole lot about. And we set these MCLs based on a 40-year-old healthy white male. We do not take into consideration that level may clearly not be safe for an elderly person, somebody recovering from chemotherapy or with a weakened immune system, and certainly young children. So people that we've talked to around town, we visited within the hospitals last night at the meeting, they don't trust this. And that's a big concern for them, and that's the key word, that there's this lack of trust. And this is why we get so many people coming to us. And I just don't know that we see the bigger picture. This is happening not necessarily to this scale, but in every single state in the United States, sometimes community after community within